Okay, David, let's get going.
Roger that. Thank you, Bruce. Hi, everybody. Welcome to BayCAN's all parties meeting. This was when we were usually going to be doing a series of regional meetings, but because regions are relative on Zoom, of course, we decided to bring everybody together. Thank you for making it through to this meeting despite the fires, the heat, the COVID, and that debate last night. All these crises are surrounding us, and we're continuing to do our jobs, and this is part of that. So thank you for being here. We can't do intros. We got too many people and too many things on our agenda, but I did want to take the moment to recognize some three new members that we have of BayCAN. And folks, I think that might be from those new members with us. So we have added Sept Environmental to our member list. Angie Zhang, if I'm pronouncing that correct, I think I saw her. Yep. Hi, Angie. Thanks for waving. We have the Greenbelt Alliance is a new member as well. Zoe Siegel, we all know, is the rep there, and I'm not sure if Zoe's here. And then Urban Economics is also a new member this year. And that is Doug Wallace, who many of us know from his time at East Bay Mud. So great to have new members and all of you existing members with us. Please observe Zoom etiquette while we're here. One is oh, there, good. Hi, Sarah, as well as Zoe are here from Greenbelt. Use the chat function, of course. So Zoom etiquette is please mute yourself when you're not talking, so you get limited background noise. And leading practice in Zoom is to show us your faces. So you know, where you can keep your camera on. So let me turn it now to Bruce and ask him to do a quick overview of the agenda, and then we'll just plunge right in.
Great, thanks, David, and good morning to all of you. Last day of September here. So we sent you the agenda yesterday via email, but we have it here on the screen. So let me just quickly go through it. Yeshi is going to lead our first item in just a minute on how do we take care of ourselves these days amidst all these various stressors going on. And then we're going to do breakouts where you get to talk about that, and Yeshi will run you through the questions and all of that in a minute. Then Sarah Church, our vice chair of BayCAN, is going to lead the second item on fire and smoke. Smart Things from BayCAN members will be reporting on some of our folks who want to tell you what they're doing in terms of their jurisdiction around fire and smoke, and we'll open it up as well. And then I'm going to lead number 3, which is latest news from the Bay Area, Sacramento, and DC, and you'll see when we get there that we have plenty to report for you. We will feature during number 3 a presentation from BCDC's Karen Tanner on some work they're doing on SB 379, which I think will be interesting. The fourth is we're going to do some mini breakouts because we obviously can't have lunch together or coffee or all the kind of stand around things that you do when we have either our all region meeting or our sub-regional meetings. You know that BayCAN is all about two things. One is providing information and news and things for you to use, but the other, equally important, is helping you network and meet other people that are doing this work around the region. So we're going to do some 5-minute, really kind of quick speed dating, 5 rounds of 5 minutes with mini breakouts as number 4. And then we'll come back and do BayCAN news about A2A, EWG, about the aligning work we're talking about. David's going to lead this session. And then we'll finish up with a 20-minute segment on starting to build a legislative platform around climate adaptation for 2021, and David and I will lead that one. So that's our agenda. Again, we are really thrilled to see you here, and let's go to item number one, which is Yeshi.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Bruce. And it's so good to see all your faces here. And yeah, I want to just recognize and appreciate that everybody made it here amidst our really wild world right now. Yeah, so in that context, I just wanted to start off by saying I feel like it's honestly impossible to begin this meeting without acknowledging what's happening on our world. We've been literally breathing in the smoke and ash burned from in and around our communities for weeks now. We've been experiencing unprecedented heat waves just weeks ago, keeping us sheltered in our homes, if we're lucky enough to have one, to stave off the heat, the smoke, and a pandemic virus. This amidst an election with higher stakes than ever and an uprising for racial justice that's still happening on our streets. And, you know, I know you all know all of this, but with that, I wanted to frame this discussion that we're about to have with a little bit of a story from my own life. During that heat wave day, I don't know if you all remember it, it was like really hot Sunday and it was really smoky, at least in Oakland, where I was and where I live. And as I looked around at the smoke map, I was trying to envision a plausible way to escape the smoke that day, to get out of it, to get some fresh air. And the resounding reality that day came down on me that there was literally nowhere to go in the entire state. It was smoky everywhere. And yeah, it just really like got me that day, just that feeling of the plight that we're in. And so instead that day, I had little motivation to do anything else other than to just sit in my living room and feel those waves of overwhelm and just awareness of all that we're dealing with in the world. And I say this because this is work that I've been learning to do in my life. And I think personally, it's increasingly critical work that we all have to do as folks working in this field, which is learning to actually sit with the personal and emotional impacts of working in the climate resilience space, in which we think about the oncoming realities of our changing world daily, and yet must somehow find it in ourselves to keep doing the work we do each day, if anything's ever going to change. And personally, I learned something really important that day, which is how important it is not to run from the emotional impacts of this work and this time in the world by distracting myself constantly, and learning to actually just sit and allow myself to feel what's happening. And on a material level, this is also the reality we're faced with. In this moment, we're not being asked, or we are being asked to respond from the places we're at right now, sheltered in place. And if we're lucky enough not to have to evacuate, that's what we're charged with, is to respond from where we are in our communities and from our positions in the work that we do. And personally, as a person in the beginning of my career, I definitely have the impulse sometimes to just want to go buy land out somewhere where there's a good water source and hide from it all. But we have work to do. And in this moment, that work for me is in the city, in Oakland, and in our communities. And so as a young person, I have to find the strength and fortitude to keep doing the work and showing up. And it's true for all of us, I think. I think we have to find it in ourselves to keep going to work each day, to keep having necessary conversations with people in our lives, to keep envisioning the possibility for a more just and livable world. And our communities need us. And I think there are a lot of ways we can do this, and that's sort of like what we bring to this conversation right now is, you know, for me, like I ended up actually driving to the Southwest to visit family. So I did leave, but I'm coming back, I promise. And that's a part of my resilience strategy, is being with loved ones and spending time in nature and being in community. I'm getting trained to facilitate personal resilience workshops through this model called The Work That Reconnects. There are other ways to take action, like Bruce, for example, just wrote a letter to his family outlining in layperson's terms the science of the changes his kids and his grandkids may face so that they can make a family plan to respond. And there are books, there are articles. I'll put some in the chat now. I know for me personally, folks like Joanna Macy and Rebecca Solnit have been personal inspirations, giving me frameworks for understanding what active, pragmatic hope looks like. A hope that's not based on unrealistic expectation for the world, but the kind that insists that if anything is ever gonna really change, we have to work towards it actively. And yeah, so that's a lot, but I say all of that to frame and bring to this moment the question to open up in this space, which is, I mean, we think that BayCAN it's a mostly professional space, but when our work directly concerns grappling with these earth-shaking questions, we think it would be a missed opportunity not to convene with each other to share about this aspect of the work that we do and how it impacts our lives. So we might offer support and resources to one another to strengthen our work and give us the fortitude to keep doing it. And I think BayCAN can offer that space as well as the professional networking and information sharing. And so with that, that's the framing for this time, this discussion. And we're just offering these questions for us all to go out into breakouts, and we'll go into groups of 4 or 5. We'll see what makes sense for this group. And the questions we're asking you to just consider in small groups is, how are the issues of this time affecting you personally? Just getting real with like what's going on for you, if you care to share. And it's also okay if you don't, but we'd love to hear from you. And what are you doing to take care of yourself and your families or personally? And then the second piece of the question that we're posing is, how do we find the personal resilience to keep doing this work? And what resources can support us to do so? And this would be a time for you to share if you found any really useful resources for yourself that you'd like to share with the rest of the network. So that's the framing. Share what feels comfortable, and know this is sort of edgy territory for BayCAN, but that's why we're here, and it's real stuff and it's important. So let's go into breakouts now and see where it takes us.
Great, thanks, Yeshi. So we're going to send you to breakouts, 20 minutes, and then back to the big main room. There are going to be 5 or 6 people in each breakout. You're self-facilitating. We don't have a leader for each one. You're leading yourselves. So just make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. There are no right answers, obviously, or wrong answers in any of this. So off to 20 minutes for breakouts. We'll see you in 20 minutes back in the room. Both questions are on the table.
Hey, I think I was put in a breakout room by myself.
Okay, let me see what I can do, Zoe. Oh yeah, it says not joined. Okay, so I'm going to move you to number 7.
Great. Thanks. Do I have to do anything on my end?
You should have been moved in there.
No, it really just, it doesn't want me to go into.
Once you, let's see, not joined.
I'm here too. I just joined late, so
Hi,
maybe
Patrick.
Hi.
We'll try another one, Zoe.
Otherwise, happy to just hang out here and wait for everyone to come back.
Patrick, I'm going to assign you to room 7.
Really just doesn't, Patrick can leave, but I'm stuck here.
Can you move yourself? Let's see.
Oh, it says, oh yeah, I think I can.
See if you can. It's going to be boring to stay here with me. There you go.
I don't know why I was returned to this session.
Interesting. Well, we're done in the groups, but
Oh,
everybody else is coming back in 36 seconds, it says.
oh, okay. Maybe I just pushed the button too quickly.
Too quickly. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's all good.
Good.
We're coming back anyway, so.
Good.
Hey,
Well,
Faye.
everybody will be here in a minute. 20 seconds.
There we go.
All right. So we're loaded back in. Are we all back, Bruce?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for taking part in that conversation. I know the breakout that that I just came from was really amazing. I actually feel a lot better in my own self after just talking about what's real in this time. And yeah, I appreciate you all for showing up and sharing what's true. And yeah, would invite, we don't have time in the agenda right now to do report outs, although I know like so much wisdom was shared, especially I know that is true in my breakout. But what I would invite is if folks have particular resources or books or podcasts that have been helping them through this time, or really anything, any strategies you've been taking, please just pop them in the chat. I'm gonna put 3 resources. One comes from Bruce, 5 tips for dealing with when climate change gets you down. It's really good. And a couple other resources, Active Hope, what I was speaking to earlier. And yeah, a number of things that have been helpful for us. Please add your own, and we can create a repository even on the BayCAN website if that's something that would be of interest to members. And the last thing I would ask is sort of leading off of this question, this time is so wild. We are grappling with these questions personally and professionally. So what I would ask of our BayCAN crew here is, would it be useful for BayCAN to offer some kind of personal resilience workshop or caucus space or work group, and not something to add a ton of work and labor to people's lives, but if you would like to attend even just like a couple hour session of some kind on that, please just shoot in the chat if that would be of interest to you. I know we have plenty of folks in our cohort here who are experienced in those worlds, and I also am a trained facilitator in some of that work, so it's a possibility for our community if that's of interest. Now, please pop any of that in the chat. And yeah, grateful to you all. And I'm going to pass it back to Bruce.
Great. Thanks, Yeshi. Great job. And thanks to all of you. Yeshi did mention that I wrote a 4-page letter with many footnotes to my family so that we could go beyond the usual discussion that we have about what trouble we're in kind of generally and generally what to do. And I'm not going to post that on the web, maybe for obvious reasons, but if you would like a copy of it, I'd be happy to send you one for whatever use that you would have. So just put your name in the chat function if you'd like a copy of the letter. So David, back to you, MC.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're still muted.
Huh?
There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Yeshi, for, if someone wants to see your letter, Bruce, for leading us in that. I found it very emotional and helpful and great. And I said that I think we should offer what you were suggesting, Yeshi. I think that's a great idea. I think this is not going to end in the near future, so we need to have all hands on deck on figuring out how to go forward. But let's stay on schedule as well, speaking of going forward. And speaking of difficult things, we're going to now talk about fire and smoke, what's happening across the region. So I'm going to hand it to Sarah Church, our vice chair, who will lead us in discussion. Sarah works at Alameda County. So Sarah, please take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, David and Bruce and Yeshi. It's great to all be together. and get to share all kinds of resources, personal and professional. And we'll be shifting now to thinking about something that's been on all our minds, how to address the wildfires themselves and then other related impacts like smoke. We may also be seeing power shutoff coming up. I know there was a really well-attended and celebrated BayCAN webinar in June on these topics to help bring all of the good thinking in our region together and to be able to share with one another. And a lot of sharing resulted from that. But unfortunately, we've seen a lot of these impacts since that time. And so there may be new resources, new ideas and new projects. And as Bruce says here, smart things being done on these fronts that we want to share with one another. So there are a few folks who we at BayCAN know have been working on this, and we'll have just a few minutes now for each of a few representatives to give a couple minutes on what resources they have available, and I'll call on those few that we know of. And then here's a little spoiler, I will also be asking all of you if you have resources to add, so you can start to think about things you want to pipe up and share with the group. I think, we're all working really fast and really hard on many fronts. And so it can be hard to remember or have the resources to do that sharing piece. And this is where we get to do that with one another. So I'm gonna kick us off because we at Alameda County have been working quite a bit, particularly on smoke, because that's an impact that we're seeing in our county. And last year we convened a cross-agency team to address smoke. And because of COVID and the fires, we had partners at emergency services, public health and fire that helped us do a cross-agency response and a smoke communications protocol for smoke. But we at sustainability have been brought back in to provide some of, some coordination resources. I've been the smoke quarterback to make sure that we're communicating effectively. So I want to mention some of the resources that we've developed. I can put links to a number of these in the chat, but some of them I can only email because they aren't posted online. So if you hear something that's of interest to you, please just put your email address in the chat and I'll make sure to capture that and send it to you. So I'm gonna quickly list, and not all reports have to be like this, but I'll just go quick. So we've developed guidelines for smoke conditions for cities or public jurisdictions or organizations, including guidance for smoke exposure mitigation and closure for testing sites, COVID testing sites, and food distribution sites. We created an FAQ for the public on smoke, your health, and coronavirus, because there are some tricky issues like masking gets confusing, smoke and COVID, and also symptoms can overlap. We have that in 6 languages. We have a table comparing indoor air quality measures for smoke and COVID, and we're engaging in a conversation right now about cleaner air centers, but then also we have some guidance for office buildings and things like that. We have guidance for preschools, numerous tweets on protective actions for smoke and COVID linked, and we are starting to do some of those in Spanish as well. And we're also conducting more community engagement on the impact of smoke and power shutoff on the most affected communities in Alameda County. And we've reconvened a cross-agency smoke protocol group to talk about more work like I said, cleaner air centers and what other communications we need. So I'm gonna put links to the ones that have links in the chat. And then I'll move us on to our next folks. Here we go. So here are the links, and be sure to put your email address in the chat, and I'll capture those if you're interested in. There are a couple things like the COVID testing sites and the table for indoor air quality that will have to be emailed. All right, so moving us along to some more sharing from our partners, folks who have done smart things on fires and smoke. I'd like to call on Zoe Siegel and Sarah Cardona from Greenbelt Alliance. They have some to share on fire resilience.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Cardona, our Deputy Director at Greenbelt Alliance, and joined with my colleague, Zoe Siegel, our Director of Climate Resilience. And David, really appreciate the shout out at the top of the call. Yeah, we're officially members of BayCAN. We've been plugged in for a number of months here, but have just been so impressed with this powerful network and all of the great work happening, and especially of Bruce, Yeshi, and David and others. So really happy to be here in full force and have this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about what we're working on. This is also a pretty pivotal moment for Greenbelt Alliance as an organization, as we're focusing our work more squarely on adaptation and resilience. Over the last 60 years or so, as a regional environmental nonprofit here working across the Bay Area in land use policy advocacy, we're really at this pivotal moment now to align more of our work to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. And a new big focal point of ours is wildfire resilience in that space. So appreciate just running through a couple of things we're working on, which will culminate in some actual physical resources and things we'd be able to share down the road. So I wanted to give a little preview and heads up on the things we're working on, in hopes we could also identify ways to plug into your work, partner, or collaborate in some way. So the first thing that we're working on starting this month, in the pursuit to really influence local, regional, even state level policy, and also local and regional planning, we are documenting the role of greenbelt lands and other open spaces in a white paper to really showcase specific case studies and examples where these kinds of lands can really play a role in mitigating wildfire and serve as buffers during wildfire, where perhaps we've seen that went not as well, and where we saw, for example, during the Kincaid fire and the town of Windsor as a particular case study of, what were the types of lands and the configuration and how that really did help to allow for firefighting from those spaces, but also really provide a buffer and help protect communities as a way to inform our advocacy, and hopefully others when we can share that white paper out, to really point to arguments that we know in theory that greenbelt lands might be a good tool in the toolbox for wildfire resiliency. We would like to bring forth some of those concrete arguments and specific case studies from California, and we'll be looking across the Western states as well for that. So stay tuned for that. The other piece of work that we're working on is developing what we're calling a resilience playbook, our own set of urgently needed land use policies, template language, and model ordinances for informing climate adaptation and resilience planning and policymaking. As I think many of you know, Greenbelt Alliance works at the local and regional level in advocating during general plan updates, climate action planning. And so it's sort of our way of pulling together our resilience platform that we will also use and work with communities to bolster additional capacity in this climate planning space. And a big portion of that will be really documenting crystally the policies and the pointed best practices for new development, redevelopment in the WUI, the wildland urban interface, and sort of really addressing from our vantage point the perspective of what are the things we need to be pushing more local and regional governments to be putting front and center in their planning work. And then lastly, through some rigorous policy analysis and dialogue with partner stakeholders, hopefully many of you, we want to really be exploring the feasibility of what I already know some of us are talking about, the perhaps more complicated or just beyond this, the current conversation, ideas of a regional transfer of development rights program, or what other kinds of more innovative incentives, what other kinds of things can we be learning from other climate hazards, like a buyouts program for repeatedly flooded properties is there something that could be learned from and applied to in looking at and mitigating our wildfire risk to properties repeatedly damaged by wildfire. So just want to share that because if you are interested in those kind of sticky topics, you've been a part of conversations, we'd also love to plug in and continue to formulate our policy agenda around those issues. So thanks for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Sarah, for sharing all of those resources, and others can chat her if you want more detail. Just gonna move us along so we can get to more updates. We have Julie Weiss from Palo Alto shared some over email but wasn't able to make the meeting. So I'm gonna throw some of these links from Palo Alto or Emergency Services into the chat and run through them real quickly. They've developed an air quality, this is Palo Alto Emergency Services. They've developed an air quality coordination plan to help guide city departments on days of poor air quality. They've been monitoring an alert wildfire camera network to look through specific cameras in their area of operations. The city also does annual wildfire mitigation with a Foothills Fire Management Plan with fuel treatments. And so you can see a link to that in the chat. That's for those in the Palo Alto Wildland Urban Interface. The Utilities Department developed a utilities-related fire mitigation plan to reduce fire hazards related to their electric operations. That link's in there. And finally, with the fire department, the city has a public outreach wildfire page on the website to influence wildfire preparedness for our wildland urban interface, for their wildland urban interface population with a Google map. So those links are all in there. We have a few more minutes if folks want to speak up with items that you've been working on, smart things that you've done on smoke or fire. You can also put resources in the chat. Yes, Bruce.
So I have something from a little further afield. British Columbia has done some really interesting work across agencies around smoke events. And so I will put in the chat box. I can't talk and put it in the chat box, as some of you have already demonstrated you can. But I will put a couple of links in there there's a guidance for public health decision makers during smoke events, and also a health and wildfire smoke response coordination guidelines about how to get public and private and media and all on the same, literally, page when they have these events. This was all part of, and I'll also put a link to this. We did a project at Berkeley last year on health, wildfires, and climate change. And there's a pretty darn good, I would say, literature search at the back of our report. The report's not too long. It might be interesting to you if you haven't seen it, but the literature review at the back of a couple of pages has a whole set of resources from around the country.
Great, thanks, Bruce. And we'll put those in the chat in a moment.
Yes,
Others, go ahead, Curtis.
Hi, Sarah. I wanted to mention that for agencies that are interested in fuel treatments for reduction of wildfire risk, that at the end of last year, CAL FIRE and the State Board of Forestry approved the California Vegetation Treatment Program with a program EIR that was designed for other agencies who have lands in the state responsibility area to use to streamline CEQA review, essentially to find projects that have treatments that are consistent with what are in the program and in the program EIR, and prove them with what's called within the scope finding in CEQA that can go quite quickly. This can be found on CAL FIRE's California Vegetation Treatment Program website, and encourage agencies that have this situation, lands they need to manage for fire fuel treatment in the state responsibility area, to check that out. It can save you a lot of time and money in getting those approved and getting CEQA compliance.
Great. Thanks so much, Curtis. And if you have any even short URLs to put in related to that website you mentioned, that would be helpful for
Will
Cal.
do.
Or we could also go poking around on our own.
Yeah, I'll go look and put it in.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it. Susan.
Yeah, I'm wondering if any agencies are working closely with indigenous communities. You know, they've been doing to prescribe berms for thousands of years and managing their forests. So curious if anybody has been working directly with local indigenous communities.
I saw an email from California Department of Public Health about tribal land management, and I would have to dig through to see if it relates to, it would answer your question if they're working closely, but any others who have heard of that or are working on it?
So this is Lindy, and this is not from my work right now, but back when I was down in Southern California, there were discussions in San Diego on tribal land management. There's lots of native lands and tribal lands in Southern California that are still held by indigenous people. And I think one of the challenges is that what used to work is not working as well anymore because of the way lands have been managed, development, as well as climate change. But it is true that prescribed fire, and San Diego's been using that for quite a while, does work. It's just that at this point in time, it's a bit challenging to have prescribed fire work in Napa and Sonoma around suburban developments. So there's lessons that we can learn that can be applied in some locations, but it's challenging to apply them in some of the areas that have started burning lately. But I can find some links for people if that would be helpful.
Sarah, this is Bruce. There are now 8 climate collaboratives like BayCAN and LARC in LA and the San Diego Climate Collaborative, and there's one on the North Coast. So I know they've been doing from the last ARCA meeting a fair amount of work with tribal groups there. So I'll see what I can find, and I'm sure some of it's about fire. I'll find that. And we're going to do a follow-up email, folks, so you can get things out of the chat box, but we'll also give you a backup to that with an email in the next couple of days.
Great resources. And we have about 1 more minute on this item. I think Danielle had a hand raised.
Yeah, hi Sarah, thanks everybody. I'm Danielle from the SF Planning Department. Again, this isn't about my work directly, but last week I listened to the webinar from the state, the California Climate Action Day, and one of the webinars included an Indigenous fire management speaker. Her name is Margot Robbins, and I can copy and paste the speakers and description, because for me it was very much like square one learning, and I appreciated hearing her perspective, along with some guests from the Netherlands, South Africa, and California District 27. So I'll share that.
Great, thank you for sharing. And if there are any additional resources that folks want to share with the group, please throw those into the chat, or if there are questions you want to ask, you can use the chat for that. I'm going to hand things back to David for the meeting to continue, but really appreciate all the resources that were shared and all the information.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and everybody for your contributions. This is, I said in the chat, I think this should be top of mind for us. I actually think that there should be an opportunity to advance policies that are preventive and responsive to the realities of climate change, as well as 100 years of forest management practices that we, I think, realize now are not working, at least in every way. So I think we should be exploring continuing this work and maybe leveraging the reality on the ground in the last 3 of the last 4 years, the way I look at it. And no years before that, in my 35 years in California, anything like the last 4 years, to advance preventive measures and save people's lives and properties and our forests. All right, so anyway, let's go on to the next item, which is I'm going to give it to Bruce for latest climate news. And we have a few speakers and a lot to cover. So Bruce, please take it away for the next half hour.
Great, David. Thank you very much. We're going to do the latest climate news. As you can see on the screen here, these will be mostly quick hits, but we're going to start with a bit longer item with Karen Tanner from BCDC talking about a project they're starting on SB 379 compliance. I saw this last week and I thought it'd be worth us taking 10 or 15 minutes here this morning to show you where they are right now. As you know, we've been interested for a while, we BayCAN, in coming up with a way or a couple of ways in which we could better understand what progress we're making or not in the Bay Area on climate adaptation. Something like a scorecard, maybe not called that. And so BCDC caught my eye the other day because they're starting that kind of thing to see both qualitatively and quantitatively who is complying with SB 379. And so Karen, let me stop sharing my screen and you can share yours, and the floor will be yours to tell us a bit about your project.
Is Karen on?
She should be. She was earlier.
Sorry, I was on mute. Somebody said yesterday that's going to be like the meme for 2020. Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, so let me get this into the big screen mode. Are you seeing the full screen slide?
Yes, we are.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Bruce, for giving us a chance to talk about this research today. So for those of you, yes. Bruce, are you saying something? You're muted, I think.
I'll say something, Karen. We see your main slide and your preview slide, I think.
Yeah, we're seeing presenter screen. If you could make it full screen.
How's that?
There we go.
Perfect. All right, great. So anyway, for those of you who haven't seen me around, I am a Sea Grant Fellow and I sit on the Adapting to Rising Tides team at BCDC. I've been there for about 3 months. So I'm working with Dana Breckwald. And I'm just going to talk to you about a research project that I've been working on since joining there. So the primary goal of the ART program is to really lead and support efforts to increase resilience to sea level rise in the Bay Area. And there has been, as you know, a lot of work going on in the region to plan for sea level rise resiliency, including some really large multi-jurisdiction vulnerability assessments. And we wanted to try and get a sense of how these efforts have helped communities move forward with their adaptation planning. And in particular, look at readiness to meet the legislative requirements of Senate Bill 379. So first I'll recap what SB 379 is and what it requires. For your reference, ARCA has a handy 2-pager available that I've drawn on to provide some of these details, and the link to that is provided on the bottom of the slide. So the bill was adopted in 2015, and it applies to all cities and counties in California. And its purpose is to ensure that climate adaptation and resilience strategies are integrated into the safety element of the general plan. Specifically, the bill requires that the safety element must include a vulnerability assessment that includes flooding risks from sea level rise, a set of goals, policies, and objectives to address the vulnerabilities detailed in that risk assessment, and feasible measures that will allow the jurisdiction to meet those goals and objectives. The timeline for the updates depends on whether the jurisdiction currently has an adopted local hazard mitigation plan. So for cities or counties that do have one, the required components must be incorporated into the safety element when revisions are made to the LHMP on or after January 1st, 2017. And for jurisdictions that don't have an adopted LHMP, the safety element must be updated to meet SB 379 requirements by January 1st, 2022. And after these initial deadlines, updates to climate adaptation content in the safety element will be tied to updates of the housing element. The state does provide some flexibility in how jurisdictions meet SB 379 requirements. For example, if the information required is already available in a standalone climate adaptation plan, climate action plan, or local hazard mitigation plan, then the safety element can be updated to summarize and reference those documents, provided that these plans are consistent with all of the statutory provisions and they are adopted and incorporated by reference into the general plan. So as you might imagine, this can make our research efforts looking at SB 379 readiness a bit more complicated. Furthermore, jurisdictions are also allowed to integrate climate adaptation planning into other general plan elements. And in fact, although there are 7 quote unquote mandatory topic areas or elements, jurisdictions are not actually required to organize this information into discrete chapters. They are free to consolidate mandatory elements and to include additional elements, so long as the relevant statutory issues are addressed. So even though we started off thinking that reviewing the safety elements of the general plan would be the best strategy, quickly learned a couple things. First, the content you might expect to find in a safety element can be found in different places depending on the city. This is just showing you a list of alternative element names that I ran across during my review for the safety element content. I also found that sea level rise content was also included in elements of the general plan that were not focused on safety issues necessarily. So this led us to conclude that we might find more sea level rise content if we widen the scope of the search to include the whole general plan, plus the housing element where that exists as a separate document. So that's what I did. I visited the websites for shoreline cities in the Bay Area and downloaded the most recent general plan and housing elements. And I used keyword searches and some targeted reviews of certain sections to find information on sea level rise vulnerabilities and the policies and implementation actions that cities have developed that are intended to address them. I looked for data on sea level rise vulnerabilities documented for each jurisdiction. And I checked each element for policies and implementation programs that address sea level rise. I'll show you some of the results so far, but I want to preface these slides by saying that I'm still refining the analyses, so the findings are definitely preliminary. And I'll be really interested to hear from you about any plan updates that I've overlooked. To get you oriented, the shoreline cities are shown here on the left, and on the right side is a list of potential vulnerabilities that we might hope to see addressed in general plans. And again, I just want to reiterate that I know there are some really detailed multi-jurisdictional vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans out there, but to meet the requirements of SB 379, you have to sort of close that loop and get that information back into the general plan, either incorporating it directly in the safety element or summarizing it and incorporating those other plans by reference. So the general plan is really where we're looking, and we're just, right now, I'm just limiting the scope to those documents. So in this figure, the connecting lines between a city and a vulnerability show that the jurisdiction does present some data on local vulnerabilities. And here I was really looking for hard data, so like miles of road inundated, number of schools affected, those kinds of data. On the bottom right, you can see I'm showing which cities have sea level rise maps available in their general plans right now, which is maybe about half of the cities. Now we'll look at the policies and programs relevant to sea level rise that were in these general plans. And shoreline cities are still on the left, and now general plan element names are on the right side of the slide. And because element names were so variable, I made an attempt to lump like with like. So that's why you see labels like safety related instead of just safety element. Connecting lines, again, indicate that the jurisdiction has at least one sea level rise related policy in an element. And what I mean by sea level rise related is a policy that either explicitly mentions sea level rise, or it's really clear from the context that the authors were considering sea level rise. So maybe it comes under a header that says sea level rise or something like that. The cities with no connecting lines didn't contain policy or program language that met these criteria. This version of the plot is showing the same data, but now the thickness of the connection is providing information on the number of policies each city has in a given element. So the thinnest connection here represents 1 policy, while the thickest line indicates 18 policies, and that's for Sausalito's draft 2020 general plan. You can see that a lot of these policies are concentrated in the safety element, but there are a lot of other connections too. Here I'm showing a similar plot, but now in programs or implementation actions instead of policies. Again, the presence of a connection shows that the jurisdiction has at least 1 sea level rise related program or action in the element. And lastly, this version of the figure is again providing information on the number of programs or actions each city has in these elements. So again, lots of connections to the safety element, but plenty of other connections too. And I know this is a lot of information to digest and you probably have some questions, but before wrapping up, I do want to ask the group just a couple things. And it would be fantastic if you could reply in the chat box. I'm really interested, oh, I have 2 number 1s. Well, it should be number 1 and number 2. Number 1, I'm really interested to hear if you have feedback on the approach we're using to assess 379 compliance so far. And I'm also really interested to know if there are other documents or resources that could help us refine and improve this research effort. Sorry about the dog in the background. And finally, definitely please let me know if you're aware of recent general plan updates that might not be available on city websites. I know sometimes the most current versions of documents are not always, available in lockstep. And my contact information is provided here. So I think, Bruce, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I think we have time for some questions if anyone has any.
Yes, we do. Thank you. And Michael Barber from San Mateo County has raised his hand. Michael, unmute yourself and go ahead with your question or comment.
So, Bruce, well, first of all, great job bringing a lot of data together, and I like the flow chart aspect of that. So that was well done. Bruce, I just bring up the point that I ended one of our last meetings with, is that there are way too many state mandates, and we've got all these different boxes of the general plan, the safety plan, the hazard mitigation plan, this plan, that plan, and they all overlap. They're all extremely time intensive. Some have more, I mean, the bottom line is that they are the epitome of the bureaucracy of government. And I think that is going to be the biggest hindrance. We don't have time to be doing this. And local governments, we've got 101 cities, 7 counties, multiple other jurisdictions. To me, I just see this as a nightmare and a huge roadblock to really going where we need to go. So my feeling is that we really need to pressure the state to figure out a way to bring this all together so that it's done in a simplified manner. My experience in San Mateo County is people are doing all of this to check off the box. There's not a lot of true work going towards improving things. So, I mean, I commend the work that you had just done here, but anyway, I'm rambling on, but I'm very concerned that we're just burying ourselves in paperwork and not really moving forward.
Thank you, Michael. And we are going to talk briefly about that issue in the last item on the agenda as we talk about a legislative platform for 2021. Karen, how would you rate so far in the work you've done, the kind of the quality of the work? I mean, or are you just checking off kind of keywords at this point?
Right. So yeah, the next stage, this research effort is going to keep going. So that was one of the reasons that I'm so interested to see if you guys have feedback on things that you think would be useful to try doing. But yeah, sort of the next step, so far I've done like the keyword searches like I described, but the next step is to try and really get at what is the quality of the planning, kind of getting to Michael's comment. You know, I can tell you from reading the policies and programs to just extract the data that I have so far that, it's a very wide range from like, folks who have a policy that says something along the lines of develop a plan for climate adaptation and sea level rise, which is very, sort of aspirational without a lot of detail on how it's going to be achieved. And then there's, policies or programs that are very specific, like we want to ensure that we are comparing our updates to our plan and making sure that we're using the same data as Marin County, something like that. So that's sort of the next step. I need to develop maybe like a rubric or an approach to allow me to sift through the information that's in these plans and get a little bit more at like, how far is this going to move the needle in terms of climate adaptation planning?
Karen, we have time for another question. There's at least one in the chat from PG&E. I'm curious to hear how hard it was to collect the data in terms of, it's just going off my screen, give me a minute here, in terms of different jurisdictions, different terms that jurisdictions are using in their plans. Is there kind of consistency in language?
It was, as you might imagine, pretty time intensive. So this is the main thing I've been working on since I joined BCDC 3 months ago. It did probably take me, just a few weeks to sort of get up and running with the actual research. But yeah, I had to develop a list of keywords that sort of incorporated like, synonyms or like different ways that folks talked about, the stuff that I was interested in finding. And then there's a wide variety of, some cities have, whole PDFs that contain the general plan that's like quick and easy to download. Other cities have, different chapters and different files. So you have to sort of stitch those together. There's actually 3 cities I haven't reviewed yet. The sharp-eyed among you may have noticed that San Francisco, Berkeley, and American Canyon weren't shown, and that's because they don't have the information in PDF format on the website. It's actually just like web hosted. So I have to figure out a way to like get that down and process through it. So yeah, this is a pretty time and effort intensive process.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to need to move on at this point, but please, there are some additional questions in the chat box that you could answer while we're going through next agenda items. And also, folks, if you have more questions, please put them in there for Karen. And terrific work. Like I said, we'll talk about Michael's issue when we get to the agenda item number 6 about building a legislative platform. So thanks, Karen, for that. And let me go back to sharing my screen. And here. So I will do a quick run through now. Actually, Dana, I'll ask you to do a couple of minutes on BayAdapt in just a minute. Well, actually, let's do that now. If you would take a couple minutes to bring us up to date. We spent a fair amount of time, as you remember, folks, at our last meeting on BayAdapt with BCDC. But Dana, can you give us an update on where the program is?
Sure. Apologies if I looked surprised. I kind of thought Jessica was going to be here to do it, but that's fine. So we are in the middle of our action teams. We have 8 action teams around different topic areas that are all working on developing draft actions. So those are coming along. We're started meeting last week. We'll be meeting through the end of next week. And then our working groups will come together on the 16th so we can look at the commonalities across all of our actions. And I did a nice little mind map that shows how interconnected they all are. So we're happy to share all of that with you when it's in a more completed state. Then we will have our next leadership advisory group meeting at the end of October. And then, and this is what BayCAN members would probably be most interested in, we're taking about 2 months to do what we're calling an outreach blitz. So we're working with MTC, for example, to get on the agenda at planning directors meetings. This is where we're hoping to do more outreach to local elected officials. We'll be having a public forum during that time, and we'll be having some smaller community meetings and CBO meetings. And if you are interested in us coming to your community and giving a presentation, we're especially interested in doing outreach to local staff as well as local elected officials. So that will be occurring through November and December. Then we'll take all of the feedback that we get during that phase on our actions and make a revision to that. And then that will make up our final joint platform, which will be adopted in early 2021 by our leadership advisory group.
Great, thank you, Dana. Thank you, BCDC and Bay Adapt. I'm going to hold the member news and updates. So to give you a little warning here, I'm going to run through Sacramento and the DC and the planet quickly. But after that, we'll have a few minutes if you have some interesting new news from your jurisdiction or entity, that'll be your time to put it in. So Sacramento, we talked to you at the last couple of meetings that some of us were working with legislators and with staff on a couple of pretty important bills in Sacramento. AB 2621 would have mandated regional adaptation plans, and we were working with them to also include some work by Governor's Office of Planning and Research to kind of scope out what would climate services and climate science services look like for a region like ours. 2371 next to it here was about climate science and all, an advisory panel. And again, we were working with them to try and improve that bill. And there was a big resilience bond. $7 billion was being proposed that if the legislature passed it would have gone on our infamous now November 3rd ballot. All of those went down with the budget cuts and the budget issues big time for the state. Many pieces of legislation made it quite a ways, and these did through the process, but in the end were taken off the table. And certainly the resilience bond was taken off the table in terms of the governor and others deciding that it was not the time to be asking people in November with all the budget issues for families and all that you'd be asking them about a big resilience bond. So, but a lot of interest in Sacramento. And again, we'll talk about this when we get to the legislative platform item number 6 about kind of next year. Good news this week, you probably saw Governor Newsom issued a new executive order in 7920 that basically is going to translate to mandating banning internal combustion engine car sales in 2035. You can argue, I think, that we need to go faster, and I think we eventually will with this. But this was a big and rather bold for a state government action to take. It's an executive order, not a law. So now there's a whole set of things that CARB and others will need to do. But it put California again back on the map nationally and internationally. There have been a few other countries that have taken this step, but here we are in California again leading the way on transportation GHGs, which is, as you know, our biggest problem right now. It is the one that is still continuing to grow while we're cutting GHGs in some other areas like power plants. California Adaptation Planning Guide that you may have used is out now in new version 2.0. You can find it on the clearinghouse for the state of California. There was a big webinar, maybe some of you were on that a couple of weeks ago to kind of show it off. In DC, if we get a change in administration in DC, there are a couple of really good looking climate plans. That one was put together for the Biden and Harris campaign. You may have read this, that there was a lot of negotiation and work between the Bernie Sanders backers and Elizabeth Warren's and others who were frankly better on climate in the campaign than Biden had been or Harris. But the new Biden-Harris climate plan, which you can find on the web, and I will put a link in the chat box, is really quite good. And again, at the national level, the most progressive thing we've had yet. It's a proposal. Also, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, chaired by Kathy Castor from Florida, has put together an even longer, I think it's almost 500 pages of what the House would like to do in terms of a climate plan. And this one includes adaptation and a pretty long chapter on it. So you have a couple of interesting things in DC if we get a change in administration. At least they'll be on the table. They, obviously, you know that it's going to be a big fight no matter who has won the presidency. And maybe we'll even know who's won the presidency by January, who knows. Climate migration. There are a number of really good articles out there these days. The media is doing, as you've seen, a lot of coverage of climate change. I would recommend this series that ProPublica and the New York Times doing as #1 on your reading list. They're quite good in terms of bringing the whole human element together with the science, because this is about people being forced to move from various countries and various places within countries because of climate change, because of heat and drought and floods, fires, all of the various things that we're seeing. It's really a good series, and there are now 3 different articles or big long articles within that, 2 on the US and 1 on global climate migration. So I'm going to stop share. That's our part of the news and updates. We have a couple of minutes more for this item, and I'm going to go back to gallery view here. And who has an update or a news item to give us briefly from their jurisdiction? You can just unmute yourself. You don't have to use the raised hand function, and tell us what's up. We always have to ask people not to be shy. Anyone? You can put things in the chat function as well, so you don't have to speak up here and tell us, but if you've got something interesting or a link to something interesting, put it in the chat function. Last call.
I have one quick update. So when I previously worked at Union of Concerned Scientists, we worked on a bill that became law called AB 2800, and it had a sunset measure in it. And so there's been activity over the past year to update that and take out that sunset measure. And it was just signed into law last week by Governor Newsom. And what it does is it requires all state infrastructure activities, from planning to design to financing to maintaining and operating, to consider climate risk. And it has been updated now to actually require consideration of the economic risks associated and that the economic costs and benefits of climate resilience as well. And so there's economic costs of climate impacts and economic benefits of making things more resilient. And so that is something that I know at the state level will have big impacts, but it also will have trickle-down impacts in terms of the funding and in terms of, that was just my daughter. Hello, her name is Emma. It'll have impacts as well on funding that is available for local governments. And we're assuming we'll have a lot more ripple effects as well. So that's just a piece of legislation and now law to be aware of.
Thank you, Jameson, and nice to meet Emma. You almost all met my grandson, Calvin, who was just here and not happy because he wasn't going on a bike ride yet, but I think they've gone on a bike ride. So who else? We've got a couple minutes left on this item.
So I'm going to shout out the Office of Resilience and Capital Planning. I think Alex is on right now from San Francisco. They're about to put out some story maps on climate for San Francisco that were really well done based on the drafts I saw. Alex can give a little bit more information about that. We also have just put out our waterfront resilience program, the Port of San Francisco's waterfront resilience program story map. So I'll put the website in the chat, but they really dive deeply into the issues along the San Francisco waterfront and the things we're looking to do about those issues. So Alex, do you want to say anything about your story maps?
Yeah, sure. So basically we made as you may have known, we recently did the update to our LHMP plan, and we called it the Hazards and Climate Resilience Plan. And basically we took the hazard analysis from that, which went into some seismic hazards, weather-related hazards, sea level rise, things like that, as well as some like air quality stuff. And pandemic, probably should have made that section a little bit longer, but hindsight's 2020. And we basically took the hazard analysis from that and like all the mapping and put it into a story map that's like interactive and has information in like a short, quick, like, way. And that's going to be going like public on our website as soon as I finish working with our contractor. So within like the next like week or so. But yeah.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Lindy. Who else? Okay, you have plenty of time in the next hour to put anything that you want us to see, a link, or know about in the famous chat box. So let's move, David. We're done with this item, and we're moving on to item number 4, virtual networking.
Fabulous. I'm going to hand it right back to Bruce here, but just point out that we don't have lunch. We don't have a common space to gather together, but we're still networking. I personally like the Zoom breakout thing. So we're going to do a bunch of those right now. And Bruce is going to lead us through that as well as handle the tech.
So hold on just a second. Let me get it up here. Oh.
Our IT department is working on this right now.
Yes, hold on. I'm trying to randomly, this is interesting. I was going to do smaller groups this time. Well, we'll try it this way. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. It's 5 or 6 people in a room, and you have 5 minutes. And then we're going to bring you back and mix it up again and send you back out. The idea here is like lunchtime or coffee time. Introduce yourself to each other. So name, organization, and a sentence or 3 or whatever about what you do. So divide the 5 minutes up. You'll see if you have 5 people or 6 people, how you can move this along. And again, in 5 minutes, we'll have you back here. So just get to know each other, or at least get to meet each other, put a face with a name. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Bruce, sorry, I'm gonna stay out of the breakout room just because I have a check-in with my office, but I want to stay on this like meeting. So
you're here. Yeah, you're in the big room.
Cool.
Hi, Bruce. I think you joined our group.
We're supposed to be all back in the big room.
Oh, I see.
So I think that's where we are. It's where I am, although I haven't left my office. Yes, I see everyone's rectangles coming back. Sarah, how did that work?
We spent a good amount of the time on just intros.
Okay.
So
okay.
we can do more.
Okay, so hopefully that worked for you. We're going to try and mix you up again. We'll see how good the randomizer is on Zoom. If you end up with the same people, tell me somehow, okay? And let me try this again. We're calling it recreate the rooms. Same number, recreate all rooms.
Bruce, you're going to be a Zoom expert when you're done with this.
It looks like it mixed you up pretty good. I'm looking at the list. So good luck, and we'll see you in 5 minutes again, okay? Okay, welcome back again. This is a little weird, I gotta say. It's weird. I'm sure, I hope it's working on your part. Yeshi, can I ask you, were you with new people this time, or was it?
No, there were like 4 of us from the same group, so we just
Ah.
had a different conversation.
I looked at the, okay, that's good, go with it. I looked at the list, and the list looked more mixed than the first, or different mix than the first one. David, did you have different people?
I had one person, me and Heather, and it was great to catch up with Heather, but
Okay, good.
for a while it was just me. I'm like, I'm sick of talking to me. That's the last thing I need. Anyway, so it's only 2 people.
Okay, well, you know, like the cocktail party, coffee, lunch thing, it is a little random, and you know, if it's 1 person or 5, go ahead. We're gonna do 1 more of these.
Bruce, we did a fun thing where rather than saying our org, we said one thing we're interested in, and then we had a little convo.
Great. So actually we're doing 2 more of these. So make it interesting, do something, you know, whatever you need to do. On my end, you know, we're recording these, and I know this from the last meeting. During the recording, you're all gone, and the only recording is of me sitting here quietly. It's an Andy Warhol, you know, comes to Zoom kind of moment. But
I'd like to see a video of you being quiet. That would be very.
Okay. My family would like to see that too. Okay, so let me mix the magic again, and we'll see. I'm trying again. I wanted to just get rid of these and start over again, but it wouldn't let me do that. Let's see. Let's add a room. Let's add another room. We'll make 10 rooms. That might make it a little better. So we'll try this again. We're gonna mix it up, recreate. We're going into 10 rooms now, and go. Have fun. 5 minutes later, we'll see you back here. They're back. Greetings. Well, that was an experiment, and we'll debrief with our little team later to see how it worked for you. But I think in the interest of time, we have two more interesting agenda items here, and that'll be it for the networking for today. I was just trying to think while you were all gone, is there a way we could do this at the end? But I think, no. So here we go. David, we are on to item number 5.
Yes, awesome. And we're exactly on time, actually a minute early. That's a BayCAN thing. We try to do that really well and surprisingly are successful. So let's talk about a few things on this list. A to A, the equity work group, aligning plans and dues renewals. I'm going to do assessment to adaptation to start, then I'll give it to Yeshi and then Bruce, and then I'll come back and do renewals really as an overview. Bruce, next slide. Okay, so assessment to adaptation was the new work group in 2020, targeted at understanding how to go from understanding our vulnerability and studying our vulnerability to actually executing adaptation programs. They're going to cost money and have all kinds of other implications that simply studying our vulnerability does not have. And we divided into 7 main subgroups: science, decision-making under deep uncertainty methods, engineering state of knowledge, permitting processes and barriers, communications, costing and funding, and governance. And we made progress on each of these with little reports that the subgroups came up with ourselves. And they're all in different stages of development. We haven't posted them yet, though they're certainly available. I don't think we've posted them. Yes, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And I think we made some progress. We also wanted equitable adaptation and the adaptations guidance process that's being led by BCDC, by Jackie Mandowski, to be engaged in the A to A work that we were doing. After the first phase of work in A to A, when people really started to dive into these issues, Jackie came to us and suggested that the adaptation guidance, which is intended by BCDC to be a document that all of us in the Bay Area are using to help us to understand all the steps that are involved and kind of get us all as much on the same page from a process, structural perspective, had many of the same issues, if not all of the same issues. And so since what we're trying to do is stitch all of ourselves together, that's a core objective of BayCAN, it's a core objective of BayAdapt, and it's a core objective of this adaptation guidance that was described to me just today as BayAdapt adjacent, if not exactly a BayAdapt process. I haven't quite been clear on that myself. Because of that overlap and those common issues, we agreed as a group to dive into the adaptation guidance process as we're diving into the BayAdapt process, to bring the understanding of these issues and the consideration of these issues to the guidance from the perspective of all BayCAN members. It's a heavy lift, not in and of itself, but in combination with all the other things that are happening. So I was checking in with Heather about where things are. She's been a little more active than me on the the adaptation guidance process. I've been much more involved in the BayAdapt process, where I'm leading the data science and technical assistance team. But I think things are moving along. And so there's no real outcome to report on today. It's really just about process, and that process continues to be underway. And what we want at the end of the day is an adaptation guidance document that is usable, available, and understood. I don't know if Jackie wants to add anything to put her completely on the spot, if she's still even here. I can't see everybody, of course, but that's kind of where A to A is leading right now. And I think for BayCAN, we want to ensure that we're adding value to that process. Jackie, I see you. So Do you want to
Yeah,
say anything?
I am here. No, I think you covered that really well. I had a chance to introduce this topic in our last really quick rounds. But yeah, I think you covered it really well. We're really moving forward. It's very, designed to be very collaborative. We want this document to really meet the needs that you are all facing, which is why we've invited so many people to participate. And maybe the last thing I'll say too is that, we really want this to be a place that both takes in and utilizes best practices where they are. So if you have those, please, if you think you're a good model of a good process, please share that with me. We also want this to point to resources that take these issues further. So if you have more detailed resources that you are creating, policy, language, for example, or others, that you think this guidance should point to, please let us know that too. So this is very much still in process. We're moving along really well. But now is a perfect time to share any of those resources.
Great. Any questions about any of that or additional comments from anyone who's participating in the adaptation guidance process? Hearing none, I'm going to hand it to Yeshi to give us an update on the equity work group.
Great, yeah, thanks David. I'm excited for all the work you all are doing in A2A. Yeah, just a quick update from the equity working group. A number of you in the working group are here on the call, and you've been hearing for the past year updates for us. We've been running for a year now. We completed a successful first year of running a working group and building a really strong community. We had many, many meetings and presentations where we heard from equitable adaptation experts, forming strong ties across our network for regional collaboration, and advancing equity across the Bay Area and our adaptation efforts collaboratively as a network. So feeling like really, really strong first year we've completed. And the whole thing culminated with an equitable community-driven planning training led by myself and my co-leads, Nahal and Phoenix, which built off and centralized all the learning that we did over the past year as a working group as an offering for both the equity working group and the broader membership, and many of you were there. We also just published the Equitable Adaptation Resource Guide, which has gone out in the newsletters and in the list. You've probably seen it, which is already getting some use by a number of members, and we're setting to probably be engaging with members who are interested in doing individual consultations to help members actually utilize the resource guide. So if you're interested in that or haven't seen the guide, please reach out to me. It's what we consider the best resources and guides out there for embedding equity into your adaptation work. And we also just launched year 2 last month, and we're currently engaged in a participatory planning process for the year ahead to stay true with our commitment to doing equitable process as well as creating equitable products. And some of the upcoming projects we'll be doing in the year ahead will likely include building out a map and an online tool in partnership with BCDC, which will map out community-based organizations, resilience projects that are already happening in each jurisdiction. And the map will also list local needs, permitting requirements, funding opportunities to help local jurisdictions as well as community-based organizations partner and build relationship and get each other resources and build projects together. So that's one upcoming project that we're still making happen in partnership with BCDC. Another is a collaboration with the NorCal Resilience Network on a Resilience Hub leadership training that's really being spearheaded by the NorCal Resilience Network in partnership with the City of San Leandro and a number of other BayCAN members. Just got a grant, super exciting, to do a leadership training it will be shared leadership training for local government, resilience people, and community-based leaders to launch resilience hubs in different jurisdictions. And we'll be having equity work group members join that training if they're interested. In addition, there is a lot of other exciting possibilities for different projects that the working group will take on to be determined through this collaborative planning process that will wrap up at the next work group meeting. And it's not too late to join for year 2. So if you weren't able to join our first year 2 meeting, reach out to me. My email I'll put in the chat, and it's a great time to join if you haven't already been involved in the equity working group. And in general, if you don't have time to join we meet bi-monthly for about an hour and a half. It's a pretty low commitment. But if you don't have time to join those meetings, but you would like to see more equity related content or resources or presentations at general BayCAN meetings or on the website or whatever, please let us know, because that's something we can do for our membership as well. You don't have to be in the working group to get the resources you need to, we can all be embedding equity into our work more, regardless of if we can show up to a bi-monthly meeting. So let us know how we can support you to do that, and you'll be hearing more from us through the year. pass it back to Bruce or David. I
Well,
don't know.
let me just real quick. Thank you, Yeshi. That was great. And congratulations and thank you for the leadership of this work group. The co-leadership of this work group is the right way to put it. In its first year, I thought the training was outstanding. A question was asked in the chat: was the training recorded for people to look at? And Emily just responded. Is that what you did, Emily?
I don't know. Did Emily? Oh yeah. Thanks, Emily. Well done. Yes, there is a recording and Emily linked it. That's what we call collaboration. And
So it was recorded and it is available, and the URL is in the chat. So that's great. And I think BayCAN has done a really important job in raising the profile of this issue, not this issue, but of this importance, and we need to continue to that. And just speaking from the perspective of the assessment to adaptation work group, this is one of the places where that work and that leadership and the development of those leading practices are going to figure prominently into finding solutions, and the same thing's going on within the Bay Adapt process as well on sea level rise. So we need to stitch this all together, and I think we're making efforts to do that. Speaking of stitching together, Bruce, aligning planning processes, we had the webinar, post-webinar.
Great, thanks, David. And yes, congratulations to Yeshi and everyone working on EWG. Great success, and we're looking for more from you this year. On the aligning planning processes issue, this was about how do we align these various plans that we are required to do: local hazard mitigation plans, general plans, climate action plans, local coastal programs under the Coastal Commission. And so we had a webinar, a number of you were probably in attendance a few weeks back, where we looked at positive examples, Hermosa Beach, Santa Cruz, San Mateo, Watsonville, and some others, examples of cities that had done this work or were at some stage in aligning these plans so that they weren't 4 completely different plans, 4 completely different outreach processes, 4 different sets of data, 4 different times you go back to your elected officials and tell them you're doing a plan, all of that. So we worked with some of the folks that we knew had already combined 1 or sometimes 2 or 3 plans in a more streamlined fashion. And that's on the website. If you missed the webinar, the entire recording is there, and you can see the Q&A as well as the presentations. But at the end, we had Michael Barber and a couple of others responded to the question we posed of, is this too hard that we're trying to make everybody align these different planning processes, and is it leading to a lot more planning and not enough doing? And so we got some good quick feedback right away that yes, this was at least an issue that we should be talking about. And as you saw, Michael Barber back a couple of items on our agenda brought it up today. So I will tell you, and this we can get to this in item 6, we are going to pursue that idea. That could we meet first as a small group of interested parties here and see if we can come up with a proposal to the state or to discuss with the state, with OPR, with other entities up in Sacramento, and maybe with legislators about eventually streamlining and really making a better planning process for climate adaptation as opposed to a whole set of separate plans, even though people have done a good job, I think, of combining them. So we're going to look at that issue, and that's what the next piece of this aligning planning processes workflow is going to be. So that's all for now. We can mention this again in item 6. David, back to you.
Sorry, any questions or comments for Bruce on this interesting, important subject? Right, weigh in on money. Good. I can't see hands raised, so if anyone has thoughts, just speak up. Okay, 2021 renewals. So I'm not going to do any numbers today. I am going to say that sustainability applies to organizations as it does to communities and ecosystems and so many other things. And the sustainability of BayCAN was really strongly established when we established a sliding scale fee structure for being a member. And in our first 2 years, we've done extremely well in sustaining ourselves. In some ways, we've had a little bit more stability than some other collaboratives around the state that have relied more on soft money. That approach is challenged in the era of COVID because of drastically reduced local government funding, of course. And we did lose some members for that reason, and I'm pretty sure for that reason only. Going into this year, a handful of members and therefore a handful of potential revenue. Our goal remains to keep our program going at the level it's been at for the first 2 years, which basically means Bruce and Yeshi as our consultant team running our programs day to day, and an active executive committee, which includes our chair, our vice chair, our secretary, and our treasurer, and a somewhat active steering committee as well. We have enough revenue this year so far, or expected in the next little bit, to sustain those operations through the end of the calendar year and have a small surplus at the end of the calendar year for heading into the next, fiscal year, heading into the next fiscal year. We're on a July 1, June 30 fiscal year. And the reason we have that is that we had a bit of a surplus going into this year based on our first year revenue, which was extremely strong, and our expenses, which were lower because we started kind of into the year a little bit. But we have a number of outstanding invoices from members. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot here. You may or may not know who you are, because who knows when checks come from our own organizations, right? It takes me weeks to figure out if we paid. Which you will be getting a follow-up from us very soon. We have not restricted participation. I'm sure there are members who have not contributed their 2021, FY21 fees so far. And, you know, we've been threatening to change that policy. Who knows if we'll ever make good on that threat. But we do need our members to support the organization to the tune of basically $500 to $5,000, depending on the nature of your organization. State and federal agencies are exempt. They're partners, not members. So if you have an outstanding invoice, you will get an email from Bruce or I soon, and we would just really appreciate it if you could elevate that and make the case for the value of what we're doing here, and pry those funds loose from your tight treasury situation to the extent possible, or let us know if that's not going to happen so that we can do planning. Like I said, we're solid through the end of this fiscal year, which is June. I'm going to advocate to the steering committee that we start the invoice process a little earlier. We've been doing it in June. We're going to, I think, need to do it in March coming up so we can really do good planning. But please do what you can to support this collaborative that is having, I think, some really positive spin-off effects for all of our work. Anything to add, Bruce? Anything to add, anyone else?
Just that we appreciate those of you who have renewed and are supporting us again for year 3. You know, just a reminder, we're lean and mean. Yeshi is in the budget at 15 hours a week, and I'm at 10. So it's not like we have a big unwieldy organization here. We're trying to keep it focused on products and services that will really help you. And we hope that we're doing that. And we thank you again for supporting that with your hard-earned money in this difficult time for budgets at all levels.
We have talked from time to time about going for some soft money or some project money or program money that's different than member fees, which are general fund availability. It's a bandwidth issue as much as anything. What options are out there, and then who's going to help us execute on a grant proposal. I personally think that this work is incredibly fundable. But again, it's a bandwidth issue. So I'll put out to the 40 of you or so still online. If anyone wants to help us with that, please raise your hand separately and send us an email. If anyone can think of some or comes across some options for that we might pursue, please let us know, and then we can maybe target whatever resources, time we have to do this, to getting some grants on, on equity, on the transition from assessment to adaptation, on fire and smoke, and on public health, on all the issues that we're engaged in. I think there should be some potential there, but we might need a little help. Okay, with that, we've gained another minute and can move to the last item, item 6. I'm going to introduce this, but follow the practice of this meeting and hand it over to Bruce, which is that we had a active group, but a very small one, focused on legislation. You see the numbers up there. 2621 really was a nice looking bill for a while, and 2371, I think, got improved over time and was also looking good. The bond, of course, disappeared completely, but might come back. We're getting interest from the ledge community, ledge staff community, in advancing what should be advanced in the next session, with hopefully a better chance for things to make it through the process. The 2621 and 2371 both died in Senate appropriations, so they made it through 3 out of the 4 committees that it needed to make it through in the Assembly and then the Senate. And I don't think it was the nature of the bill. So what we want to do is be prepared for that and prepared to respond to that interest and build a platform that we want to favor within the state legislature, and maybe have some hope for getting something through that really advances the ball in the way that it should be. Bruce, what did I do that you were going to do or not do that you are going to do now?
That was perfect. So we wanted to do 2 things today to start this process of working on a possible ledge platform and advocacy from BayCAN. The first thing is we're going to do an instant survey, because we like surveys, and an instant poll here in just a minute, where you'll get some choices in a kind of forced choice manner on what you would like to see money from Sacramento come. It's a narrower question than what would you like to see Sacramento do. But if we had money, what are some things that you'd like to see it spent on so that your local government program could move forward? And then secondly, we want to see who's interested out here, who wants to volunteer to work with David and I and Yeshi and all as we start to develop a legislative priority little package. We can do this work, but it would really be best if we're doing it with active involvement of more of our members. So that is that's a couple of things we're just going to do here. So this is going to be the little poll that we'll do in a minute. And again, this question is a little narrower than what do we need from the state. And so, for instance, the question that Michael Barber wrote up about having having legislation so that we would have one plan to do for adaptation and not 3 or 4 required by different entities, both federal and state. That would be a separate issue and a separate thing that we could put on our agenda. Think of this as you're running your program and the state decides to come up with some money to support local adaptation. Which 3 of these 7 things here would you prioritize that would most help your program? So running down the list, would it be money for supporting you doing local vulnerability assessments at your city, your county, or special district? Number 2, would it be money for CBO engagement and community-driven planning? 3, would it be money that you would like to see go towards kind of technical assistance and climate services, better work on science that's available and data and helping interpret all of that? Would it be money for number 4, which is public outreach and education campaign of some sort in the region that would support your work on adaptation locally? Would it be regional adaptation planning as AB 2621 that went down to defeat was going to mandate that we're getting more local plans and assessments, but this would be a requirement for regional adaptation planning. And so would you say, let's spend some state money on linking cities and counties and special districts together here in the region? And getting to the bottom of the list, what about spending, would you prioritize spending money, if you were the czar here, on actual on the ground projects like wetlands restoration or walls for sea level rise, better forest management in terms of wildfires, cooling centers for heat, or, but things, not planning, but actual projects in your area. And finally, this notion that Karen brought up earlier of doing general plan updates, which can be quite complex. That's why a number of cities and counties in our region and across California haven't done their general plan updates for a number of years. And in this case, this would be money for SB 379 compliance in the next couple of years. So it's a 2-year time frame. You're the czar. You get to pick 3 of these 7. I'm going to launch the poll. You can take a minute to look at this. We'll give you a couple of minutes to fill out your little ballot. And let's see how this goes here. So here are the deals. And again, please vote for 3 of the 7. And I am launching the poll, and you now can look these over and start to vote. Can you all see the poll? David?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are they all at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? They're in a different order, but that's all right.
Sorry about that. Vote early and often, as they used to say in Chicago. Maybe we need to resurrect that for the next month. But for now, climate adaptation. You're voting. Where would you spend? Where would you prioritize? These are obviously all important. I should have said that at the top. These are all important to doing our work. But we're trying to just get just an initial sense today of priorities. Another minute or so. We've got 80%, 82% voting. Take your time. We'll get to the last couple of people here and then we'll end it up. Thank you for your input. And again, we're just trying to take the temperature, as they say in the climate world, of this group that's here today. Nothing scientific, but just trying to see how are we initial sense of priorities from you. It looks like we still have 3 people, and maybe that's me and somebody else. I'm not voting, so there's 32. Okay, we've got, give it another minute here. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 10 seconds. So if you're still voting, please get your votes in, and then I'll hit the button and we'll see the results. Okay, now, can you all see the poll results? How about we do share results? There we go. It's kind of small on my screen. Is it big enough for you to see, or should I make it bigger?
See it. You can maximize it too, and then just blocks out everybody else.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can make it any bigger. Okay, as long as you can see it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So David, why don't you take it from here? What do you see?
I see on the ground projects is number 1, 78% said yes to that. Regional adaptation planning. The interesting thing about on the ground projects is, you know, you might have different feelings about need for funding for one thing versus another. Anyway, regional adaptation planning was number 2. Number 2 is CBO engagement and community-driven planning. 56%. Number 3, regional adaptation planning, 50%. Number 4, climate services, technical assistance, 34%. And then public outreach and education is next, followed by local vulnerability assessments and SB 379 compliance, bringing up the rear at 9%, possibly because of Michael's speech earlier about bureaucracies. But anyway, Heather makes the point that there are other options that we need before on the ground is ready. I thought of that myself. I mean, there's a lot of talk about we need funding for projects, but there aren't really shovel-ready projects that are quite prominent out there. But I did check this one myself because I do think we need to start to build a fund for this and start talking about the costs of things that we're going to be doing, to the extent that there's going to be a lot more that's going to need to happen going forward.
And this one, David, and group has come up in a couple of meetings I've been in with local elected officials in the last few weeks, that if we get a change in administration, there will be a big infrastructure, loosely defined package, and there will be stimulus money after the first of the year. And for regions and locals to start thinking about, at least thinking, what would be the kinds of projects that they might propose for that stimulus money. And some of that infrastructure or on the ground stuff could fit in nicely to some of the resilience work here.
I want to add, I just noticed that numbers 2, 3, and 4 are, regional planning, CBO engagement and community-driven planning, and climate services, technical assistance were kind of the underpinning of AB 2621 that Mr. Mullen, who is the deputy speaker, if I'm remembering correctly, got through 3 of the 4 committees that I mentioned. It's his staff, as well as the speaker's staff, that we've been talking to about that set of goals and that piece of legislation. And so when Bruce gets to the next item, if these things are priorities for you and on the ground projects and the other elements as well, weighing in, contributing to our conversation with state legislature, I think will be aligned with what everyone here thinks is important.
Obviously, these are just 7 things. There are more. So please, again, use the chat box to add an item that's past number 7 here, 8, 9, and 10, or to make a comment about this so we can see that later and get a little more information than just forcing you to walk through a very simple poll. I think that's good for now. Again, use the chat box. It'll be open till we're done at 12:30. We have a few more minutes. And let me go back to, thank you for the poll. Let's go back to number 4 on item 6. So again, we'd like to recruit some volunteers who would like to work remotely, Zoom-wise with us on what the legislative package. We've never done this before, so maybe it's not a package, but what priorities would you have for our next year? We're going to start going back to talk to legislators in a month or so. We've been told that they will be meeting on their own and putting together their ideas for bills in both November and December. So this is a great time for us. We've already had one conversation with staff to one of the committees, and we'll definitely be doing some more of this. I know that some of you have issues with that you aren't the person at your city or county or special district that handles legislative advocacy. But if we can do this kind of on our own here, kind of behind closed doors, you can help influence and have input for the work that some of us are going to do by going to Sacramento remotely. In fact, the last in-person meeting I think David Bihar and I had was in Sacramento working on 2621. But if you were looking at your phone at all, like we were during the meeting about this legislation, about the big resilience bond, you could see that the world was kind of caving in at the time, and it did. In a matter of days, we were on lockdown. So volunteers, please nominate yourself in the chat box and we'll collect those, and also your comments on this. So David, that's all we have for today. I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, please keep in mind for this, it is going to be substantive. It's not going to be the political part. At some point, you'll want to go back to your ledge lobbying staff, if you have one, to get your okay. I had to do quite a bit of that. But what we're talking about now is what's actually needed in legislation. What is the right approach and framework? It's very substantive questions on the adaptation enterprise as a whole. And so there's a chance to use your expertise as adaptation leaders to contribute to the drafting of these bills, and we'll all work on the politics as best we can as things move forward. Anybody want to add anything?
One more for me, David, just that unfortunately, the door is open here for us on climate adaptation. You know, that's what's happened in the last couple of years. I mean, when some of us went to Sacramento 5, 6, 7 years ago, you had to spell adaptation for legislative staff. You don't now. And that was a combo of the drought and now the fires. Quite unfortunate and a terrible thing going on, you know, as we speak. But it has really, in my work in the last few months, it has really again opened up our elected officials, local and state, to understanding that this is a problem. Even if we're starting to really go ahead in California on GHG reduction and carbon pollution and all, which we're making some good strides on, got to go faster. Now adaptation is really on the table, and we have an opportunity here to influence how that goes.
Thank you to Zoe and Michael for volunteering already. The nomination process will not close when we end this call. Please let us know if you want to help us envision where state legislation should go.
Can you say a little more about the time commitment and time frame? Sorry if I missed that. And I will add that we're happy to share. We did a similar process internally, and we can share what we came up with for that.
Thank you, Emily. You know, I'll just weigh in, and Bruce can as well. Lobbying over time in Sacramento is a sustained effort. It really takes going back and forth, because they're not only hearing from us, they're hearing from others, and they're making changes, and they're not always making our changes. They're making other people's changes. You need to respond to the changes to your changes. So I wouldn't soft sell that, but it's, you know, I think the time frame in terms of how many months it goes over is not necessarily that long, because you get one legislative season. So I expect there'll be things, Bruce, you might want to weigh in on this, coming out at some point in the process, and we want to be influential before that and then stay in contact after. It's one reason why the little rump group that we had of Warner and Bruce and myself and Meg Arnold from Sacramento Valley Vision was not enough. We need more people in the room with us. Bruce, did I get that more or less right?
Yeah, and we have to really watch it here. I threw in hours of my own outside of BayCAN to help work on this last year, and I'll do that again because I feel very strongly this is something that will really help us. But we have, as you know, a lean and mean budget here, and Sacramento, as David says, takes time and it takes relationships. It's why I've personally stayed out of it a lot, but until this last year. But we had an opportunity last year. We had a couple of people call us from Sacramento and once they showed an interest in what we had to say and our experience in speaking, trying to speak for many of you on what locals need to make this really work, because this has to be done locally and regionally. We took advantage of it. So we'll try and keep your time also to maximize the impact with a small amount of time if you can give it to us.
Any other questions on this? All right, then we can let people go with these final words. We moved, as I said, our regional meetings into one large regional meeting. We're going to have another, our sub-regional meetings into one large regional meeting. We'll do the same thing early next year, January, maybe February, we'll see. And work groups continue throughout. I want to thank Yeshi and Bruce for all of their work in making BayCAN go day to day. We wouldn't exist if it wasn't for them. We know we all have limited time to put into this. And I would add the executive committee and steering committee members to that. And I want to particularly thank Bruce for all the great visioning of today's meeting that he did in terms of the breakouts. I thought they were really fun and great to do. I got a lot out of them, and I think it's an invigorator, you know, as Yeshi started us in talking about how do we stay sane during these weird, crazy times, and one way is to connect to each other. And, you know, for all of its flaws, Zoom gives us those options, and I really like the breakouts, and I hope we can do more of that in the future. So on that, I'll say thank you to everybody and all of you for being with us. And we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, David. Thanks,
All right.
Ashley.
Take care.
Bruce.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe, everyone,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
and take action.
Yeah.